Chapter 1. A Fresh Start in England. 12-year-old Uğur stared out the window of the airplane as it descended over the lush, green English countryside. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. After spending his entire life in Turkey, he was embarking on a new adventure, a new school, a new home, and a completely unfamiliar language. Uğur glanced nervously at his parents, who sat beside him. His mother offered a reassuring smile, while his father placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready, son?" his father asked. "This is going to be a wonderful opportunity for all of us." Uğur nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He knew this move was a chance for his family to start over, but the uncertainty of the unknown weighed heavily on him. As the plane touched down, Uğur gathered his belongings and followed his parents through the bustling airport. The sounds and sights overwhelmed his senses, the announcements echoing through the halls, the crowds of people bustling about, the unfamiliar English signs. He clung tightly to the straps of his backpack, his palms sweaty. Once they reached the car that would take them to their new home, Uğur gazed out the window, silently observing the small town they were passing through. The quaint houses, the winding roads, the towering spires of the local church. Everything seemed so different from the bustling streets of Istanbul. "This is our new neighborhood," his mother said, breaking the silence. "Isn't it lovely?" Uğur nodded, though he wasn't sure he agreed. It all felt so foreign, so far from the life he had known. As they pulled up to a modest two-story house, Uğur's stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Well, here we are," his father announced, turning to face Uğur. "This is our new home. What do you think?" Uğur forced a small smile. "It's nice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His parents exchanged a concerned glance, sensing Uğur's unease. "I know this is a big change," his mother said, placing a hand on his arm. "But I know you're going to do great. You're going to make lots of new friends and have so many wonderful experiences." Uğur nodded, though he doubted her words. Making friends was the least of his worries. How was he going to communicate with anyone when he could barely understand the language? As they unpacked their belongings and settled into the new house, Uğur's anxiety only grew. Tomorrow, he would be starting at a new secondary school, filled with unfamiliar faces and an unfamiliar language. He couldn't help but wonder how he would ever fit in. That evening, Uğur lay awake in his bed, staring up at the ceiling. He missed the familiar sights and sounds of his old neighborhood, the laughter of his friends, and the comfort of his native Turkish. As he closed his eyes, a single tear rolled down his cheek. The next morning, Uğur's parents drove him to the imposing gray building that would be his new school. His father gave him an encouraging pat on the back, while his mother hugged him tightly. "Have a wonderful first day, Uğur," she said, her eyes shining with pride and worry. "We'll be here when you get home." Uğur took a deep breath and stepped through the school's entrance, his backpack feeling heavier than ever. The bustling hallways were overwhelming, filled with the chatter of unfamiliar voices and the clanging of lockers. He clutched his schedule tightly, trying to decipher the room numbers and class names. Suddenly, a group of students turned the corner, laughing and shoving one another playfully. Uğur froze, his heart pounding as they approached. The students paused, their laughter fading as they eyed him curiously. "Hey, you're new, aren't you?" one of the boys said, his brow furrowed. Uğur nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Uğur," he replied, his voice barely audible. The boy exchanged a glance with his friends, and they all burst out laughing. Uğur felt his face flush with embarrassment, his fingers tightening around the straps of his backpack. Uğur, the boy repeated, the mockery evident in his tone. What kind of a name is that? Uğur opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel the eyes of the other students upon him, their expressions a mix of amusement and indifference. Suddenly, a tall, gangly boy stepped forward, shoving the mocking student aside. "Leave him alone, Liam," he said firmly. Liam scowled, but backed away, his friends trailing behind him. The new boy turned to Uğur, offering a warm smile. "Don't mind them," he said. "They're just a bunch of idiots. I'm James, by the way." Uğur simply nodded, unsure of how to respond. James seemed friendly enough, but Uğur couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that had been weighing on him since he'd stepped into the school. "Do you need help finding your first class?" James asked, his expression genuine. Uğur hesitated, then slowly nodded, handing James his schedule. James scanned the paper, then gestured down the hallway. "Looks like your first class is just down this way," he said. "I can walk you there if you'd like." Uğur managed a small, grateful smile and followed James, his heart still racing with anxiety. As they walked, he couldn't help but feel like an outsider, a stranger in a world he didn't understand. When they reached the classroom door, James turned to Uğur, his expression warm. "Good luck, Uğur," he said. "I hope you have a great first day." Uğur nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into the unknown. Chapter 2. Discovering the Shadowing Technique. Uğur trudged through the school hallways, his backpack feeling heavier with each step. The first day had been an uphill battle, and he could still feel the sting of his classmates' laughter whenever he tried to speak up. His English was limited, and the words often tangled on his tongue, making him dread the thought of another day like the one he had just endured. As Uğur entered his English class, he noticed a friendly-looking boy approach him. "Hi, I'm James," the boy said, extending his hand. "I noticed you were new and seemed a bit lost. Is everything okay?" Uğur hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I'm Uğur," he said, stumbling over the words. "It's difficult." James nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I can imagine. Learning a new language must be really hard. But hey, don't worry. I'm happy to help you out if you want. Maybe we could practice together sometimes." Uğur's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope igniting within him. You would do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," James replied with a warm smile. "I'd love to. We can start right now if you'd like. Mr. Williams is about to start the lesson." Uğur found himself nodding, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. As the class began, James leaned over and started whispering translations and explanations, helping Uğur follow along. Uğur listened intently, repeating the words under his breath, grateful for the unexpected kindness. When the lesson ended, Mr. Williams approached Uğur. "Uğur, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. Uğur's heart raced, wondering if he had done something wrong. "Of course, sir," he responded timidly. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed a bit lost in class today," Mr. Williams said. "I wanted to let you know that I'm here to help you however I can. I've actually been using a technique called shadowing with some of my students, and I think it could really benefit you." Uğur listened, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Shadowing?" Mr. Williams nodded. "It's a language learning technique where you listen to a conversation or audio recording and repeat it out loud, trying to mimic the speaker's intonation and pronunciation. It helps train your brain to get used to the rhythm and flow of the language. Uğur's eyes widened, intrigued by the idea. How does it work? He asked. Well, the basic idea is to find audio or video recordings of native English speakers having natural conversations, Mr. Williams explained. Then you listen to a short segment and repeat it out loud, phrase by phrase. It might feel a bit silly at first, but it's a really effective way to improve your listening comprehension and speaking skills. Uğur nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. I would like to try this, he said, his voice filled with determination. Mr. Williams smiled. Excellent. I'll put together some resources for you to get started. And remember, don't be afraid to ask for help. We're all here to support you on your journey. As Uğur left the classroom, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadowing technique sounded like exactly what he needed to start bridging the language gap. With James's friendship and Mr. Williams's guidance, he might just have a chance to feel at home in this new, unfamiliar environment. That evening, Uğur sat in his room, carefully listening to a short conversation from a video Mr. Williams had recommended. He paused the recording, took a deep breath, and began repeating the words, focusing on the rhythm and intonation. At first, his voice sounded awkward and stilted, but he persisted, determined to master the technique. Day after day, Uğur dedicated himself to the shadowing practice, carving out time before and after school to listen and repeat. He found comfort in the familiarity of the voices, and as the days turned into weeks, he noticed his confidence slowly growing. In class, he even started raising his hand, tentatively offering responses when called upon. One day, Uğur was paired with a girl named Sarah for a group project. She greeted him with a warm smile, and Uğur felt a sense of relief wash over him. Hi, I'm Sarah, she said. Mr. Williams told me you've been working really hard on your English. Would you like to work together? Uğur nodded, his heart racing. Yes, I would like that, he replied, surprised by his own fluency. Sarah's eyes widened, and she smiled. Great. Let's get started then. I'm happy to help you with anything you're struggling with. As they worked on the project, Uğur found himself opening up more and more. Sarah was patient and kind, taking the time to explain concepts he didn't understand. Gradually, Uğur began to feel less like an outsider and more like a member of the class. When the project was complete, Sarah turned to Uğur with a proud expression. You know, you've made incredible progress. I'm really impressed with how hard you've been working. Uğur felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice steady and confident. It is difficult, but I'm learning, and you have been very kind to me. Sarah smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm glad we got to work together. If you ever need help with anything, just let me know, okay? Uğur nodded, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter. As he left the classroom, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a place for himself in this new world. Chapter 3. Steady Progress and New Friendships. As the days passed, Uğur's dedication to the shadowing technique became unwavering. He would listen intently to his classmates' conversations, repeating the words under his breath, trying to mimic their intonation and rhythm. At home, he would practice the phrases he had learned, speaking out loud to himself, determined to solidify his grasp of the English language. The steady progress was visible in Uğur's newfound confidence during class discussions. Where he had once sat silently, avoiding eye contact, he now raised his hand, contributing his thoughts and opinions. His teachers were pleasantly surprised by his growing participation, impressed by his determination to overcome the language barrier. Uğur's friendship with James also deepened during this time. The outgoing boy would often invite Uğur to join him and his friends during breaks, patiently slowing down his speech and rephrasing words when Uğur struggled to understand. James would encourage Uğur to practice his English, offering gentle corrections and praise for his efforts. "You're getting so good at this, Uğur," James would exclaim, grinning encouragingly. "Keep it up, and soon you'll be fluent in no time." Uğur felt a sense of gratitude towards James, who had taken him under his wing and become a true friend. The warmth and camaraderie he experienced with James made him feel less like an outsider, slowly chipping away at the wall of isolation he had built around himself. The bond between Uğur and Sarah also blossomed during their study sessions. As Uğur's English proficiency improved, Sarah found herself increasingly impressed by his perseverance and academic potential. She would patiently explain complex grammar rules and vocabulary, ensuring Uğur had a solid understanding of the material. "You're doing really well, Uğur," Sarah would say, her eyes filled with genuine admiration. "I can see how hard you're working, and it's paying off. If you keep this up, you'll be top of the class in no time." Uğur cherished these moments with Sarah, not only for the academic support, but also for the genuine care and encouragement she provided. Her kind words and unwavering belief in him gave Uğur a sense of confidence he had never experienced before. One day, Mr. Williams announced that the school would be holding a special event, a multi-class presentation on various cultural traditions from around the world. The teacher's eyes landed on Uğur, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Uğur, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity for you to share a bit about your Turkish heritage," Mr. Williams said. "What do you think?" Uğur's heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The thought of standing in front of his peers and speaking about his culture was both thrilling and daunting. He glanced over at James and Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I would love to, Mr. Williams," Uğur replied, his voice steadier than he had expected. As the days leading up to the event unfolded, Uğur found himself spending countless hours preparing his presentation. He meticulously researched Turkish customs, traditions, and celebrations, determined to share the richness of his heritage with his classmates. James and Sarah offered to help, contributing ideas and offering feedback on Uğur's draft. The night before the presentation, Uğur's nerves were palpable. He paced his bedroom, rehearsing his speech over and over, his brow furrowed in concentration. What if he froze up on stage? What if his classmates didn't understand or appreciate his culture? Sensing Uğur's anxiety, his mother approached him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've worked so hard, Uğur," she said, her voice soothing. "I know you'll do wonderfully. Just be yourself, and your new friends will see how special your culture is." Uğur nodded, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. With his mother's reassurance and the support of James and Sarah, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The day of the presentation arrived, and Uğur waited anxiously in the wings, clutching his notes. As his name was called, he took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he stepped onto the stage and looked out at the sea of faces, something remarkable happened. Uğur's gaze landed on James, who was beaming with excitement, and then on Sarah, whose eyes were filled with pride. Seeing their encouragement gave Uğur the courage he needed. He began to speak, his voice initially wavering, but quickly gaining strength and confidence. Uğur shared the vibrant colors and intricate patterns of traditional Turkish clothing, the rich flavors of his favorite dishes, and the joyful celebrations that marked important events in his culture. As he spoke, his classmates leaned forward, captivated by the glimpse into Uğur's world. When Uğur concluded his presentation, the room erupted in thunderous applause. His peers, who had once treated him with indifference or even disdain, now looked at him with newfound respect and fascination. Several students even approached Uğur afterward, expressing their interest in learning more about Turkey. Uğur felt a surge of pride and accomplishment as he made his way back to his seat, his eyes meeting those of James and Sarah. The two friends embraced him, their faces shining with joy and pride. "I knew you could do it, Uğur," James exclaimed, giving him a playful punch on the arm. Sarah beamed. "That was amazing. You should be so proud of yourself." Uğur couldn't help but smile, his heart filled with a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. As he looked around the room, he realized that the walls of isolation he had once felt were crumbling, replaced by a growing sense of acceptance and camaraderie. The school event had marked a pivotal moment in Uğur's journey, a turning point where he had not only showcased his cultural heritage, but had also earned the respect and admiration of his peers. With a renewed confidence in his abilities and the support of his newfound friends, Uğur knew that the challenges ahead would be surmountable, and he looked forward to the next chapter of his life in England. Chapter 4. The Big Moment. The day of the school project had finally arrived, and Uğur's heart raced with a mix of nerves and determination. After months of diligently practicing the shadowing technique and steadily improving his English skills, he was determined to put his newfound abilities to the test. As Uğur entered the classroom, he couldn't help but feel a slight tinge of self-consciousness. His classmates, who had once excluded him, were now buzzing with excitement about the upcoming presentation. Uğur took a deep breath and scanned the room, spotting James and Sarah waving him over. "You're going to do great, Uğur," James said, giving him an encouraging pat on the back. "We've been practicing together, and I know you've got this." Sarah smiled warmly. "Exactly. You've come so far, and we're all here to support you." Uğur nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for his newfound friends. Their belief in him gave him the confidence he needed to face the challenge ahead. As the teacher, Mr. Williams, stepped to the front of the class, Uğur straightened his posture and tried to push aside his lingering doubts. The project required each student to give a short presentation on a topic of their choice, and Uğur had chosen to speak about his favorite Turkish dish, meze. One by one, his classmates took their turns, speaking confidently and articulately about their chosen subjects. Uğur listened intently, silently practicing the words and phrases he would need to use in his own presentation. Finally, it was his turn. Uğur approached the front of the class, his hands trembling slightly. He glanced at James and Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod, and then launched into his speech. At first, Uğur's voice was a bit shaky, and he stumbled over a few words. But as he continued, something shifted within him. The more he spoke, the more the words began to flow naturally. He found himself describing the vibrant flavors of the meze dishes, the rich history behind their preparation, and the importance of sharing meals with family and friends. Uğur's classmates listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to genuine interest. As he concluded his presentation, his voice gained confidence, and he felt a swell of pride in his accomplishment. When he finished, the classroom erupted in applause, and Uğur couldn't help but grin from ear to ear. He had done it. He had overcome his fear and delivered a successful presentation in English. As Uğur returned to his seat, James and Sarah enveloped him in a celebratory hug. "I knew you could do it," James exclaimed, his eyes shining with pride. Sarah beamed. "You were amazing, Uğur. I'm so proud of you." Uğur felt a warmth spread through his chest, and for the first time since arriving in England, he truly felt like he belonged. The rest of the presentations continued, but Uğur found it increasingly difficult to focus. His mind was still racing with the excitement of his own success. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the class, Uğur was the first one out the door, eager to share his achievement with his family back in Turkey. As he hurried down the hallway, he nearly collided with a group of his classmates who were gathered in a tight circle. Uğur slowed his pace. His curiosity piqued, and as he drew closer, he recognized the voices. They were his former bullies. "Did you see how the new kid butchered the English language up there?" One of the boys sneered, eliciting laughter from the others. Uğur felt his stomach drop, and his heart sank with disappointment. Just when he thought he had finally found acceptance, his moment of triumph was tainted by the cruel words of his peers. "He's still just an outsider, no matter how hard he tries," another boy chimed in, shaking his head in disdain. Uğur stood frozen, unsure of how to react. He wanted to defend himself, to prove that he had made real progress, but the words caught in his throat. The self-doubt that he had worked so hard to overcome began to creep back in, and Uğur felt the familiar sting of isolation. Just as he was about to turn and walk away, a familiar voice cut through the taunts. "Hey, leave him alone!" James shouted, pushing his way through the group and standing protectively in front of Uğur. The other boys fell silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to unease. "Uğur did an amazing job up there, and you all know it," James continued, his voice firm and unwavering. "If you can't appreciate how much he's accomplished, then you don't deserve to be his classmates." Uğur watched in awe as James stood up for him, his heart swelling with gratitude and a renewed sense of hope. Sarah soon joined them, her gaze filled with a fierce determination. "Uğur has worked so hard to learn our language and fit in," Sarah said, her voice laced with disappointment. "The least you can do is show him some respect." The bullies shuffled uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shame and defiance. Sensing that they had lost the upper hand, they reluctantly dispersed, muttering under their breath. Uğur turned to James and Sarah, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you two." James grinned and threw an arm around Uğur's shoulder. "That's what friends are for. We've got your back, no matter what." Sarah nodded in agreement, her expression softening. "We're in this together, Uğur. Don't let those jerks get you down. You should be proud of how far you've come." Uğur took a deep breath, letting their words sink in. He may have faced a setback, but with the support of James and Sarah, he knew he could overcome it. The journey was far from over, but Uğur felt more determined than ever to continue his linguistic adventure and prove his worth to his classmates. As the three friends walked to their next class, Uğur couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of optimism. He had come so far, and with the unwavering support of his newfound allies, he was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead.